we're going to talk about bringing up your repressed center. You guys remember in session 2, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? When we talked about and explored stances. And you had a working hypothesis at the end of that session as to whether you belonged in the dependent stance, or the aggressive stance, or the withdrawing stance. That hypothesis might have changed since then, it doesn't matter, but I feel sure by now you know which stance is yours. And the work of this session is we're going to revisit the stances and learn some new things that I think will be really quite helpful to you. Stances are each made up of 3 Enneagram numbers or personality types. So the aggressive stance is made up of 3s and 7s and 8s. And these are people who have an unconscious drive to reshape people and situations. In the dependent stance, you have 1s and 2s and 6s. And these are people who have a reference point that's outside of themselves, not inside. And so they have lots and lots of opinions, but their opinions are underdeveloped thinking because they've not reevaluated them since they formed them. The withdrawing stance, 4s, 5s, and 9s, and their reference point is within themselves. Okay, you know, one of the things people ask me when they're asking about the history of the Enneagram, where it came from and all that, is some numbers want more information than we've got available to us. But here's what I always try to say. I just know the Enneagram's true. I know it is. And here's one of the ways I know. There was a guy in the 40s and 50s whose name was Maurice Nicoll. And he came up with this study of people. And he's the person who said, no matter what happens out in the world, we respond to it in one of 3 ways. What do I think? What do I feel? And what am I going to do? So do you see, if we take his work and lay it right on top of the Enneagram, then we get the thinking triad and the feeling triad and the doing triad. And you can't do that unless stuff is true. And then let's take the work of Karen Horney. She lived about the same time. She was German-American. And here's what she said. She said, you know what? If you watch people, they respond to other people in one of 3 ways. They either move toward them, or they move away from them, or they move against them. Now, if you lay that on top of the Enneagram, then in every triad, you get one person who moves away, and one person who moves toward, and one person who moves against. And you know why it works that way? Because it's true. So we've compiled work from lots of people. I didn't do it. The people who went before me did. And triads then are formed by what is dominant between thinking, feeling, and doing. But stances, which we're fixing to talk about, are formed by what's repressed between thinking, feeling, and doing. So, somewhere between the ages of 8 and 12, one of the wounds, or many of the wounds that you experienced in childhood, affected you in a way that either your thinking or your feeling or your doing decided just to step back. And so it moved back, and the other 2 centers just started handling everything by themselves. By the time you were 12, you were handling everything with 2 of the 3. And you have this repressed center that's just waiting back here. Now, the good news is, it hasn't gotten beaten up in the world like the other 2 have. The bad news is, it's not as mature as the other 2. The best news is, the work for the rest of your life is to bring up the one that's repressed. That's the work right there. And it'll take you a lifetime to do it. And it's kind of fun, actually, once you start. And so we're going to identify what that is so that you can start bringing that up. And here's what you're going to discover. Because this center backed up between the ages of 8 and 12, it's the most pure. So if you're feeling repressed and you're kind of feeling bad about that, here's the news for you. Your feelings are the most pure of anybody on the Enneagram. And if you're thinking repressed and you're kind of offended by that, just know that once you start to bring up thinking, it's the purest of the available thinking in the culture. And once you start bringing up doing, the things you do will be the things that need doing and the things that make a difference. So as we go through this, I want you to grab it. I want you to love this module, and I want you to grab hold of it because it can change your life. Now, there's a tendency, culturally for us for sure, to push down rather than pull up. We try to suppress rather than activate. And in Enneagram work, we don't push down anything. So I don't want you to push down the center that's dominant and the center that supports the dominant. I want you to bring up what's repressed so that it rises to where the other two are. Aggressive stance. There are 3 types that have repressed feelings: 3s, 7s, and 8s. Now, they have feelings and emotions, but they express them indirectly. And they aren't emotional because they dismiss emotions. They're usually upbeat and optimistic, in part because they avoid a lot of the difficulties in relationships because they're just thinking and acting and not feeling. They say to me, I don't have a vocabulary to express feelings. And so they dodge personal questions. We don't usually realize that they haven't answered the personal questions we asked until the conversation is over and we've all gone home. And then we realize that we told them personal things and we asked them personal questions in return and we didn't get any answers for those. And that protects their privacy, and it decreases outside expectations, and it increases personal freedom, and it decreases the chance of surprise and unexpected emotion. Aggressive means their unconscious drive is to reshape people and situations. Remember that. They use their energy whatever way they want to because they're not caught up in the personal stuff of life. Life for them is about control and accomplishment and drive and achievement. And they come across as aggressive and pushy, somewhat oblivious to the feelings of other people as they respond to them. They use humor to smooth over rough edges and rough spots in relationships, and they put responsibility for hurt feelings on the other person. So they're so aggressive, you sometimes don't tell them if your feelings are hurt, but if you kind of work up what you got to have on board to do that, they come right back at you with, well, why didn't you tell me that? If you would have told me, it could have been completely differently. And you end up saying, I'm so sorry. It's fascinating. Their orientation to time is the future. And it disguises weakness in forming personal relationships. And they don't have to relate to people and their feelings in situations that don't exist yet. So the future is very comfortable. 3s focus on completing the project and then the goals beyond that. 7's attention is riveted to the next activity that they're absolutely sure is going to be fun and exciting. And 8s are preparing for the next struggle and the next crisis. Dependent stance. These 3 types have repressed thinking. And the thinking center is underdeveloped, so what they really have is non-productive thinking. They constantly look at situations, wondering what should happen next. Their reference point is outside of themselves, and they set very high standards. They must do what other people expect of them, and they must do it well. All of these 3 numbers are highly focused on what's happening right now. So for 1s, they're focused on what needs to be done now. And for 2s, they're focused on what does the person in front of me need right now. For 6s, they're focused on what their daily responsibilities are and what their schedules are and how they're going to accomplish all of those things. It's very difficult for them to plan ahead because they're not sure what today's going to bring and what the people in the day will ask of them. Sometimes I have my whole week scheduled, and then 7 phone calls change my whole week's schedule. These are people who have underdeveloped thinking, which means it's easier for them to assimilate ideas from other people and from the culture. And they can hold on to 20 years of old ideas without examining them. They usually need to have information repeated, and they're repeaters themselves. One of the things I do that's terribly annoying is I have a phone conversation with you, and then at the end of the conversation, I wrap up everything that we just said. And people who love me, I know are doing something else that whole time. These are people, 1s, 2s, and 6s, who are driven by anxiety. And they try to disguise that for themselves and for you by being gracious. They try to be busy and gracious so that you might not notice. The withdrawing stance, 4s, 5s, and 9s. These 3 types have repressed doing. And that doesn't mean they don't do anything, but it does mean that they generally do what they want to do and not necessarily what needs to be done. They're tempted then toward shortcuts, especially at home. And they're often blind to the possibility that they should do something about a situation. You remember the story I told you about Joe and me being on the airplane? And the people who spoke only Spanish and me wanting him to help? And then the big conversation he and I had after that, and I said, "Why don't you help?" And he said, "It never occurs to me." And that's because people who are in the withdrawing stance don't see their role in things. So it doesn't occur to them to step into it. And then they wonder what happened, and they analyze how things should be fixed, and they have some ideas, but they just don't take the initiative to do something about that. What they could do simply never enters their mind. All right, withdrawing literally means they look within themselves for what they need. So when they repress their ability to affect the world, strength that comes from the doing center is what affects the world. Then they have to look within to survive. Do you see that? They're not comfortable connecting with the world. So they think and feel and talk more than they actually do. And they're able to rationalize their way out of almost any difficulty. They can be dissatisfied with their lives because they have no idea how to act on their own behalf. They have difficulty moving their ideas through to completion, and all 3 are focused on the past. Why? Because there's no doing there. It's already done. 4s ruminate about the past, relationships, conversations, and all that's missing from their lives. 5s think about information that they've gathered in the past and how they can realign that and make it more available and accessible when they need it. And 9s think about the way their lives have been lived, good and bad. And they tell me that they feel powerless to change anything that wasn't good. These 3 numbers usually love nature, and they love to be outside. Now, I want you to remember that the repressed center stops normal development between the ages of 8 and 12. And since this center has been hidden away for protection, it doesn't have a lot of scars, so it's the most pure aspect of your life. And when you start to bring it up, you're going to discover the most beautiful qualities of your soul. This is a good time to remind you that this is a journey. In other words, process, but you know how I feel about that. 3s, 7s, and 8s. You are action-oriented numbers. You really like results. And you find shortcuts pretty helpful at times. So I'm going to give you some steps, but you're going to be inclined to skip a few. And you're going to need to retrain some of your natural inclinations. And retraining takes time and practice. All right, 1, 2, 6. They determine your agenda much of the time. I'm going to work you through some steps so that you might want to pay attention to your own agenda and not let other people determine that for you. And maybe even your own thoughts and feelings. You're going to need to pay less attention to other people, and that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of practice. 4s, 5s, and 9s. You're so accustomed to focusing inward. And that's one of the reasons that you are so comfortable thinking independently. You retreat into yourself and then you rely on your own strength to get you through. And I'm going to walk you through some steps too, but you're going to have to pay some attention to the thoughts and the feelings and the desires of other people, or you're not going to be able to do the work that's best for you in this stance, and that's going to take some time and practice. All right, let's revisit one of my favorite quotes. The Zen priest Suzuki said, "When you try to understand everything, you will not understand anything. The best way is to understand yourself, and then you'll understand everything. For that understanding, your personality's home base. It's comfortable. It's like a comfortable pair of shoes. And honestly, the Enneagram is the only map I have to give you, but it's only a map. And you're going to have to travel it yourself. Nobody can do it for you, and you cannot do it for anybody else. You have to have this experience. Lots of people ask me if I can tell other people what their numbers are after I've been around them for a while. And the answer is probably yeah. But I never do. Because this is about the journey. I would hate to take that away from somebody. It's all about the journey. It's not about an end fact that you can do something with. You got to take the whole journey. So let's begin the journey, remember, with self-observation. And it's got to be non-judgmental. Don't forget. 3s, 7s, and 8s. Honest self-observation is really tough because it's really hard for you to be honest with yourself about you. 1s, 2s, and 6s. Observing yourself is difficult because you're always focused on other people. And 4s, 5s, and 9s. Honest self-observation is difficult because of your inward focus. If everything happens inside of you, there aren't very many checks and balances. There's not much comparison going on. And when you're doing repressed, it appears that you make fewer mistakes, but I'm not sure in reality that your percentages of mistake making are not as high as everybody else's. Secondly, all of you are going to have to learn to be self-aware enough of where your focus is and where it naturally goes. Brian McLaren says, what you focus on determines what you miss. And that's really important because when you hone in on one thing, you miss everything else that's going on. And you are tempted in your number to habitually, in a patterned way, focus on the same things all the time. We're going to begin with the aggressive numbers 3, 7, and 8. 3s. Your attention naturally goes to what will support your image of success. And you're very aware of what's required to get approval for your accomplishments and for your successes. 7s. You're aware that your natural tendency is to focus on future plans. Even though all those plans are positive, you still keep your options open. 8s. You're focused on control. It's habitual for you. Controlling people, controlling personal space. Controlling your own vulnerability is really a big one for you. So, step 1, honest self-observation. Step 2, know where your focus is and what you're paying attention to. Step 3, train your attention, 3s, 7s, and 8s, away from habitual thinking and doing and thinking and doing and doing and thinking and toward real feelings. You're going to have to decide to do that. Now, all of you need to remember that you have the energy of all 9 types available to you. Just go get it. It's available to you. Try some new ways of seeing, and that includes intentional feeling for you. And step 4, be nice to yourself. It's not going to help if you get impatient with yourself and angry with yourself, and if you talk down to you about you. There's no future in that, because then you defend yourself. So I can help you with a few things that you might want to watch for. 3s, You can learn to catch yourself when you begin to think, how can I put a different spin on this that'll make the project look good or that'll make me look good? You see that trap? How can I change this just enough to make all of this look like it went just like we had it planned? And once you do that, then you're committing yourself on a deeper level to the way things have always been. Another temptation, threes, is to say things or to avoid saying things that lead other people to make you think you've accomplished more than you have. When you're trying to fool other people about who you are, or when you're aware that you're playing a role, you're in trouble. And that should be a warning to you that you respond to and do something about. Sevens. Anytime you have a desire to do something else, then you know your personality's on automatic. And that's often triggered by anxiety or pain. You know, I've been teaching the Enneagram for a long, long time. I've taught it in a lot of rooms, in a lot of cities, to a lot of people. And I can watch sevens start wishing they were somewhere else doing something else. It happens usually late morning. And they start to kind of check their watch, and then I see them check their phone, and then they text, and then I can tell by the expression on their face whether or not the other person said, yeah, I'll meet you. It's really fascinating to watch all that happen. And you know, I'm so bold, I go straight to them and say, I know you want to be somewhere else, but you really need to stay for the whole day. Also, sevens, be very careful when you start automatic reframing. I've never seen anybody do what you guys can do. And I don't know who you think came up with the statement, it's all good. I can guarantee you it was a 7. No matter how much pain they're in, you can say, I'm so sorry, it's all good. And then when they think they're really spiritually mature, and you say, I'm so sorry, they say, oh, I'm so thankful for this opportunity to learn. None of it's true, of course. When that happens, personality's running the show. All right, 8s. Watch out when you start stepping into power voids. You know, if there's an absence of power, you just feel it intuitively. You don't want to do that. Even when things need to be done, it may not be yours to do. And when you do that, you know that you're on autopilot. And 8s, be really careful when boredom sets in. Because when you get bored, you start to feel vulnerable. And far more important, when you start to feel vulnerable, you get bored. And a bored 8 is trouble. Because once that happens, excess is the antidote for boredom in an 8 personality. And that would be excess. Work, food, partying, people, shopping, drinking. Now, please hear this, all of you. When you're on autopilot, then your personality is driving you. And you will not bring up feelings when your personality is driving you. You will not do it. So you're going to have to watch for it so you can learn to bring them up. Did you know, 3s, that stopping for periodic intervals actually increases productivity? Because you have a little time there to think in what might be the best way to move forward. And 3s need motivation that is more than, I'll take this on because I can make it work. That is not a good enough reason. So you got to do better than that. 7s, default programming. Remember my whole issue with the computer wanting to outline when I only want to use bullets? Default programming in a 7 keeps you in a half range of feelings, the positive half, of course. But you know, you could trick your own personality by not wanting to miss anything, because that's your nature. And then go ahead and explore this other half range of feelings that you're kind of deciding to do without. And the dark side is interesting, and it'll really help you with self-development. 8s, be aware all the time that you hate being controlled. You almost can't stand it. But when your personality is in charge, you're being controlled. Your personality is controlling you, not you controlling it. So use that image and work toward not being controlled by a default mechanism that's happening in every 8 everywhere. Now, all these pieces are really important because they're all ways of avoiding feelings. So 3s, you avoid feelings when you don't stop to think about your actions. And 7s, you know that you're avoiding a half range of feelings. And 8s, when you're always wanting to be in control, then you're disconnecting from other people. Especially, you're disconnected from people who are seldom in control. All right, 1s, 2s, and 6s. It's your turn. Remember, second step is be self-aware. Because you got to know where your focus is, so we're going to work on that. Think about the default settings I just discussed. You really need to be aware where your attention naturally goes because what you focus on determines what you miss. And more importantly, your energy follows your attention. So wherever your attention goes, your energy is going to be right behind it. 1s, your attention naturally goes to right and wrong and to what needs perfecting, what could be better. And you're aware of what needs to be improved and how you would or could make those improvements. That's a default setting for you. Don't pat yourself on the back for that. It's not good. Kick back. Let it be. 2s, your attention naturally goes to or migrates to what other people need and to how you can meet those needs. You got to be careful with that. Believing that if other people need you, they will want you and they will meet your needs is not always true. And 6s, you are habitually aware of at least 2 things: worst case scenarios and unspoken agendas of other people. And just think for a minute how much energy that requires. That's exhausting to think about that. So how are we going to change all of this? Well, once you're aware of the realities that we just looked at, then there are several things that you can try, and here's the first. You can break the pattern by choosing not to act in the moment. You can also choose a new way of responding. And once you reach this new level of awareness, you can choose the old pattern, but you can choose to use it in a new way. Kind of like we talked about yesterday, and you need to have some new motivations to go with the old motivations. Once you reach this new level of awareness, you're going to matter more. So, 1s, 2s, and 6s, you need to wait and think before you respond. So let me just give you an example of some tricks that I'm using, and you can come up with some for yourself. I no longer carry my calendar with me, and I do not keep my calendar on my phone. So when you ask me to do something, I cannot tell you in that moment yes or no, because I don't have my calendar. If I look and see who's calling and think I know what they want, I let it go to voicemail. Because if I answer, then I'm going to do it. You see that? Now those work for me. That may not be what works for you, but you need to find things that do. Remember I explained to 3, 7, and 8 that you have the energy of all 9 types available to you, and so do you, 1s, 2s, and 6s. And so I want you to think about these things as you try to shift away from habitual responses. When you're engaged in a regular daily activity, try wondering how another number would do it. Just try that. Try wondering how another number would respond. Is it similar to you or completely different from you? And you know what? After you get used to that for a while, just go ahead and pretend you're another number and respond that way and see how it feels. And step 4, you just got to be nice to yourself. I'm going to tell you that over and over till I think you're going to do it. Here are some things to watch for. 1s, be aware When the process of increasing irritability is present in you, you're going to feel it. And the talk in your head will be about how you have to take on too much responsibility because other people don't do their part. Ones, notice when you're comparing yourself with other people. They're better than me, they're worse than me, they're smarter than me. I wish I was as good as them. And remember when I talked to you in one of the earlier sessions about chaining? About putting everything together and hooking all things to all things? This is the place where that happens. In stances is where that occurs, and it happens right here in this stance, and you got to quit doing that. The fact that one part of something's bad doesn't mean the whole thing's bad. Remember, oneness makes you want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that's a big mistake. Twos, be very aware when you're feeling unappreciated for all that you do. Because I can guarantee you you're about to behave badly. That's when you can be absolutely sure that your personality is driving you. So when you're martyring, you're in trouble. And you know we can martyr with the best of them. One day I was kind of, woe is me, I've done so much for you girls and I'm so tired and I've just taken care of everything that you needed and I really counted on you for this and you didn't do it for me and just this week I did this and this and this and this and this. And very respectfully the girls looked at me and said, who asked you to do those things? Because we didn't. Sorry, twos, I have to carry that and I want you to carry it with me. Be very, very careful with this very subtle sign. Joe and I just cleaned out our books. And we read a lot, and we have a lovely library, and parting with a book is very difficult for me. But let me tell you the books that I didn't have any trouble getting rid of. The ones that I never opened. And you know, I had a book on macrame. And a book on praying your dreams. They were books about subjects that I bought because I wanted to connect to another person who was interested in that subject. Now you have your own way of doing that if you're in this stance. You have your own way of feigning interest in things that you don't really care a thing about just because you want to connect to somebody else. So you watch for that. And do it by asking yourself, now am I really interested in this? Why am I pretending to be? It'll always be because somebody you know or want to know better has those interests. When you're adopting new interests because of another person, you can be absolutely sure that your personality's in charge. Sixes. When worst case scenario thinking is dominating and you're wondering what you will do if, that's default space for you. And you need to be very, very careful when you go along with that instead of stopping it. Because it can take you places you don't need to go. And it creates new fears for you that you don't need to carry. Did you know, ones, that because you're concerned with improvement of all things, including yourself, you seldom enjoy leisure time? Leisure is actually necessary. It makes you a better person, which is what you're trying to be. And without it, you're not very well-rounded. So a good spiritual discipline for a one is leisure. And that's not very satisfying if you're a one. Twos. It'd be really good for you to be aware when you rely too heavily on sensing and meeting the needs of other people. That's your default space. And almost every time it takes you to a place where you're empty and angry. We really need to learn that giving ourselves away as twos and not meeting our own needs is a big mistake. And when the giving is yours to do, it will not drain you. It will energize you. And you won't be giving to get. And the relationships that develop will have far more integrity. Sixes, Learn to play the devil's advocate with yourself. Start questioning your own thoughts. Look for positive and upsides and the good. It's a natural thing for you to say, yeah, but. So when you're making everything negative, say, yeah, but it could be. And then make all of it positive. What if you were scanning the horizon for things that are safe and good instead of for danger? Try that. Default settings in personality work like nothing else does. And it works when we don't know what our preferences are and when we don't understand our choices. So the things that I'm talking about are really important, 1s, 2s, and 6s, because underdeveloped thinking can take you down. Think about this, 1s. What if judgment, underdeveloped thinking, could become discernment? And 2s, what if feeling other people's feelings could instead become empathy? And 6s, what if duty could become commitment? Productive thinking doesn't come with the default settings of your personality. All right, 4s, 5s, and 9s, here we go. Where does your attention naturally go? Well, 4s, yours naturally goes to what's missing. You believe others have it and you don't, and your response to that is, if only I had that. And it's usually something normal or average, which you reject anyway. 5s, your attention naturally migrates to what other people are going to want or expect from you. And then you think about how much it's going to cost you and what's going to happen if they intrude on your space and how much is it going to interfere with your agenda. 9s, your attention is naturally focused on the agendas of other people and how you can merge with them. And that's not good for you, because then your own desires and your own agendas are set aside too often, and you know what you do in response to that? You get more passive aggressive. So how are you going to change all this? Well, you can break the patterns by acting and doing. All of you, 4s, 5s, and 9s, you need to be acting and doing. And once you get to that place of awareness where you do something different, then you're going to start responding to life more quickly rather than waiting and waiting and waiting. And remember, as I told the other stances, the energy of every number is available to you. You just have to do enough work to be able to know what energy you need and go get it. Remember how important it is that you be good to yourself on the journey. And here are some things to watch for. 4s, when you're in that space of feeling like something's missing, that's a wake-up call for you and for your life. And what generally follows is you'll find yourself focused on one person, one thing, one place, one detail, and you're saying that would make everything perfect. And I'm so sorry, but no, it won't. And that's your clue that you're on automatic pilot and that you need to wake up. And the reason you need to wake up is because what's happening right here and right now is real, and you're missing it. Another thing for you to watch for is when you feel like you're different from everybody else, or when you're feeling like nobody understands you. Because when you're focused on being unique, that's automatic pilot in your personality. 5's, the quickest and easiest way for you to know that you're on autopilot is when you're conscious that you're detaching from what's going on and or when you're wanting to withdraw. Sometimes there's going to be some self-talk here. Wonder what this is going to cost me. I don't think I want to do this. I'm feeling kind of trapped. You'll also know that you're in default mode when you're either withholding information or hoarding knowledge. You know, 5s are people who believe he who has the knowledge has the power. So you need to be careful about minimizing your own needs, because I get that you don't want to get caught in meeting the needs of other people. What you don't get is you can't set up life in a way that you're never going to need them to help meet your needs. That is not possible. 9's default mode for you is procrastination. It's just as simple as that. One of the new lines that I have that I've been using on Joe and Billy and Jenny for about a year now is this: later is not a point in time. So when you tell me that you're going to do it later, you're not telling me a single thing, because it's not a point in time. And then you end up feeling like you're pushed or like you're behind. That should be a wake-up call for you. And self-forgetting sounds like this: it doesn't matter. Whatever. I'll do whatever you want to do. Default is when you're not in touch with, or when you're ignoring what you want and what you desire and what you need and what your preferences are and what your priorities are. Did you know, fours, that you are so frequently searching for intensity because you have disdain for anything that's average or normal? And you know there's a chance that your highs are too high and that your lows are way too low. And that can be exhausting for you and for the people around you. Now, I understand, fours, that you're willing to pay almost any price for authenticity. And so the question I think you've got to ask is, what would you have to learn and accept that is an ordinary, simple part of the day in order to understand that that's where authenticity almost always lies? Fives, you're very likely a hoarder, and you don't talk about it with other people, and you sure don't want me to talk about it, but I must. And I got to tell you, I'm not as worried about people who hoard material things as I am about people who are hoarding feelings and time and energy and affection. We are really blessed people. And in my world, and I suspect in most of yours, there is abundance everywhere. It's dishonest to live in scarcity mode. For most of us, that's not reality. So when you're hoarding time and affection and things and resources, and when you're even hoarding yourself, you need to use your gift of knowledge to think through that. And you need to use the potential gift of wisdom that you have to do something different about all of that. Because that pure piece of personality that comes with hoarding is a far piece, as they say where I'm from essence. It's a long, long way. So process these realities when it comes to your heart. The more you give, the more you receive. Now think about that, fives. That's the truth. The more you give, the more you receive. And paradoxically, the more you give, the more you get. Isn't that what we say? Hoarding's not a good thing for you, and it's default. Nines, all things are not equal, and all things do not work themselves out. Some things, when left unattended, don't even work out for the best. Now, I know that you get nervous when you have an authentic desire because you don't know if it's going to cause trouble. And you declare inner peace and a desire for peace by not doing. And that's not going to last forever. From the bottom of my heart, I say this to you. It is genuinely easier, nines, to get going and get it done and get it finished. I have a friend who's 10 years older than I am. She tells horror stories about sitting at the dinner table looking at a glass of milk that's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter because she will not pick up the glass, drink the milk, and finish it. Keep that in mind when you have things laid out in front of you to do. It's so much easier just to get it done and over with. Get yourself a Nike t-shirt that says, just do it. You're going to have to trust me when I tell you that life will be more peaceful for you if you're engaging in doing. In personality, remember, everything's habitual, predictable, patterned behavior and responses. So 4s, 5s, and 9s, these things are all important because they talk to you about underdeveloped doing. Think about this, 4s. What if your desire for intensity could become a desire for authenticity? And then add this. Ordinary stuff is very authentic. 5s. When you have a desire for knowledge, what if it could become a desire for wisdom instead? But you know what? Knowledge and wisdom are different in that wisdom is applied knowledge, which means you had to take it out of your head and apply it somewhere in the world to see how it works. So why don't you give that a try? It's going to cost you something. You have to risk a little, but you'll get a double payback. And 9s, what if all that you're avoiding could become all that you're accepting? What if you could just change those 2 things? By avoiding conflict, you know that you often cause conflict. And by self-forgetting, you know that you're missing self-awareness and self-acceptance and your own value. So for all of you 4s, 5s, and 9s, productive doing does not come with the default settings of your personality. So here's what I've got to say. Bring it up. Get to work and bring it up, because this repressed center is the purest one you have. And we all need it from you. Work on it. Thank you.
Continuing in stance work, I know that we have all learned, based on our stances, that there is a center that is repressed. So we have a dominant center, and for the aggressive stance, the dominant center is doing, and that's supported by the supportive center, which for the aggressive stance is thinking. And then we have a repressed center, and for the aggressive stance, I can definitely vouch personally that that is the feeling center. And for me, on this journey, and I think for just 3s, 7s, and 8s in general, it's such a hard concept for us to even embrace, because it seems to get in the way of what we do dominantly, all that doing, and the thinking supports that. There are examples that I can give of one that I love, a story that I love to tell about needing t-shirts for 60 kids, and my coworker and really good friend was supplying them, and I couldn't get a hold of him, and I needed the shirts, and I ended up calling his boss, because all I wanted to do was just go pick up the shirts. We had the event that night. I just needed to pick up the shirts. Find out later, when I talked to him, that he had a family member in the emergency room in the hospital, and had all of this tragedy going on in his life. And the reaction from other stances usually is, being appalled that I didn't stop to think about, feelings in that sense. And it was getting in the way of productive doing. Now, what I think gets lost with other numbers who aren't in the aggressive stance, is I had a great connection with him, and we did talk about it. If I had it all to do over again, I'd do exactly what I did, because I needed to get the shirts for the 60 kids. And what I've learned in that, if I operate in that mode all the time, is that right there is where the rub comes for our stance. That's where we walk over people that we didn't mean to necessarily. And that's a challenge.
How difficult is it, knowing that what you have to bring up is feelings, to access that side of your personality?
I'm going to speak from an 8's perspective. It's very difficult as an 8, because it inherently is going to involve trusting people enough to be vulnerable enough to actually have some feelings, and let someone else see that more tender side. And I think it's hard for all numbers in the aggressive stance. 3s have access to feeling. They can gauge the feelings in the room as a whole, but they never know what they feel internally. And 7s, Gary talked about it earlier, as a 7. 7s like to deal with the happy, positive, fuzzy feelings, but the negative feelings and the sad feelings are really tough for them.
Well, for those of us who are in the withdrawing stance, what is repressed for us is doing. Now, that's hard to believe because we all feel like we're doing something all the time. But particularly when you're looking at a 9, the difficulty with us is that we're not doing what needs to be done. And it's difficult to bring that up because of the understanding that we have that we're always doing something. It's for those who are the 4s, their dominant stance is feeling, and that's being supported by their thinking. So whatever it is they're feeling, they're taking to a new level, whether it's a high or a low. For those who are 5s, it's they're thinking all of the time, and that's supported with what they're feeling about what they're thinking about, but not getting anything done with all of that process. Those of us who are 9s, what's dominant for us is doing, and like I say, we're doing something all the time, but we're not always doing the right thing. And as Suzanne teaches, if you laid down in front of us a bunch of cards with all the things we had to do, we wouldn't give more value to one than the other. And so what is key for me, I know from the perspective of a 9, trying to deal with my repressed center is to prioritize the things in my life that need to get done so that I can accomplish much more and be more effective and healthy in the doing that I'm supposed to be doing. Things don't get lost or left behind because I procrastinated in some form or fashion.
And for those of us in the dependent stance, 1s, 2s, and 6s, what's repressed is thinking. And I have the same challenge as a 6 as you do as a 9, that what's also dominant is thinking. So I think I was really resistant to this idea that I don't think, but I don't.
To be in those core numbers where
it is. We're the same thing because I think I'm thinking all the time, and I am, but I'm awfulizing. I'm worst case scenarioing. And I was thinking about what you were saying as people look at the aggressive stance, and we sometimes think you guys kind of bulldoze over people, and that you don't have feelings about things. I remember we had a layoff recently, and watching my boss, who was a 3, thinking, and I confronted him about it. I said, "You just see, this woman has been here all these years, and if she was leaving on her own accord, we'd be celebrating. But because we're laying her off, it's just kind of like, here's your pink slip." And but we were able to talk about it, and he was able to say, "Okay, let's talk this through." And what he was doing was helping me think productively. And he was like, so if we give her a plaque, if we throw her a party, if we is that really going to make her feel better about this? And, as I thought about it, no. I mean, it's unfortunate, it's sad, but that was healthy thinking. That was productive thinking. And I know for Suzanne as a 2, 2s, their challenge with thinking is they're thinking about relationships. Everything's relational, everything's personal. They're not necessarily thinking about what's theirs to do. And then for 1s, it's the voices. They think that conversation with the voices is productive thinking. So
I know, obviously, it's our work, it's our journey to bring those up, and I can definitely attest that in the moments and in the times where I've really been vulnerable with someone, or even in a situation where I maybe just kind of step back and let what I usually stuff down kind of come to the surface as an aggressive number. All that energy is still there, but it comes with a new level of authenticity when you bring up feelings that people can really relate to. And so I see that in a palpable way from the aggressive stance. Are there times when you guys have worked to bring that up and you've really seen the fruits of that?
For me, with the doing repress, when a 9, Suzanne talks about inertia, a body at rest stays at rest and a body in motion stays in motion. When a 9 gets into motion and is doing what needs to be done, she have a real sense of accomplishment and a real sense of sort of the wholeness of our character being the very best that it can be, being the healthiest that it can possibly be. in the process of doing that. Because what we're not trying to do with any of these repressed centers is to repress any of the others. For me, I don't want to repress the other parts of my life, but bring this one up so that I can be as whole and as healthy and complete as I possibly can be in my own number.
I've definitely, as I've worked to bring up more productive thinking, I'm so much more at peace just with things as they are, kind of that. And I think sixes in particular are really good at asking questions, and when I'm in a healthy space and I'm more productive thinking, I'm asking really good, honest questions that challenge people, but it's not from a basis of fear. I'm not asking all these questions because I'm afraid. I'm asking questions because part of the good side of scanning the horizon for danger all the time is that you're a good troubleshooter, and you can use that in healthy and positive ways.
I'm very blessed to have a 6 who is my secretary. So she asks me all the questions and keeps me doing and keeps me on task because she wants it to all work out and work out well. So she writes down absolutely everything that I need to do and keeps me positive in my doing.
Right.
On the track.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting how we can help each other, bring those things up. And when you spoke about the times where you really do connect with that feeling and you show it, I am just, when I see a 9 in that right action doing what's theirs to do, or I see an aggressive number showing an emotion, it is powerful. I mean, it is like you're finally seeing a whole human being there, and it's as it should be. I think people seem. I know with the aggressive numbers, it just seems more genuine to me. It seems more. You're not just this superhero. You really do have this other part of you that feels deeply.
And with withdrawing numbers, I know those are the times, even as an aggressive number, that I'm like, wow, I will absolutely follow you. That's because...
Where did that come from?
A withdrawing number stood up to do something.
Because you guys really, you don't, in the withdrawing stance, you don't really step up in the forefront unless it's really important. And so that's a gift for those of us that in other stances that can recognize that, and because you really are tremendous leaders in those times.
I think that's part of the fruit of Enneagram work, and part of the fruit and of the reality of dealing with these repressed centers, because when we do begin to bring them up, there's real transformation that takes place in the life of the individual. And that's really part of the whole purpose of the Enneagram anyway, is that we can become as whole and complete and as healthy as we can be within our own number. And so watching the aggressive numbers really bring up feeling and enrich their lives by bringing that aspect into all of that energy that they have and that they bring forth. And those persons who are so connected to other people with feeling, being able to raise thinking to a new level within their lives, and find that there's a richness in their relationships because the thinking is involved. And for those of us who are repressed in doing, who are moving and not just sitting back and really moving forward and doing something creative and healthy, and making the world a better place, adding their wisdom, their knowledge, their feelings, or whatever else, is what's so transformative about the Enneagram as a whole.